At 3:17 a.m. on a humid August morning, Catherine Morrison woke to wetness spreading across her pillow. Not sweat, blood. She sat up fast, heart hammering against her ribs. Her left cheek throbbed with a deep, pulsing heat that made her teeth ache. In the bathroom mirror, what stared back barely looked like her own face. The small mole she'd had since she was 20, the one she'd been ignoring for 8 months, had transformed into something monstrous, swollen, discolored, the edges black as rot. The tissue around it grotesquely distended, pulling her eye downward. "Tom," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her husband appeared in the doorway. The man who'd survived 2 years in the Vietnam jungle without flinching took one look at her face and went pale. For the first time in their 46-year marriage, Catherine Sullivan Morrison, registered nurse, caretaker of everyone, was genuinely bone-deep afraid. How had it come to this? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. 8 months earlier, on a Sunday morning in January, life had been beautifully ordinary. Catherine Morrison stood in her kitchen at 7:15, ironing her husband's blue shirt with the practiced efficiency of 46 years of marriage. The fabric was soft from countless washings, the collar slightly frayed. She pressed the iron along each seam with careful precision, the same ritual she'd performed every Sunday morning since 1978. The radio on the windowsill played softly, an oldies station Tom preferred. "You Send Me" by Sam Cooke drifted through the warm kitchen, the song that had been playing at the church social where they'd first danced. Kate hummed along, her voice blending with the gentle percolation of coffee in the old pot on the stove. She'd refused to buy one of those modern machines with timers and computers. Some things didn't need improving. From the corner of her eye, she watched Tom sitting at the kitchen table. He hadn't spoken yet this morning, but that was normal. Her husband was a man of silences, comfortable ones mostly. He gazed out the window at their modest backyard, tapping a rhythm on his knee that only he could hear. That small, repetitive movement Kate had learned decades ago meant he'd have the dream again. The jungle dream. She'd stopped asking about the nightmares around 1985. Tom would tell her if he needed to. That was their unspoken agreement. The smell of cornbread baking filled the kitchen, Tom's late mother's recipe, the one good thing his mother had left him before cancer took her in 1975. Kate had memorized it by heart, made it every Sunday without fail. At 68, Kate carried herself with the upright posture of a woman who'd spent 30 years as a nurse at the Portland Veterans Hospital. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob that required minimal fussing. Her hands, still strong despite the arthritis beginning in her knuckles, bore the evidence of decades of wound care, IV starts, and patient lifts. Her wedding ring had worn thin, the gold almost translucent in places. She caught her reflection in the window above the sink as she moved to pour Tom's coffee. There on her left cheek, just below the eye, sat the small dark mole she'd had since she was 20. Part of her face as familiar as her own eyes. This morning, though, something felt different. The mole was slightly raised. Had it always been that way? She touched it briefly, tender, maybe a little warm. Tom accepted his coffee with a slight nod, their fingers brushing in the exchange. 46 years, and that small touch still mattered. "Church at 9?" she asked softly. "Mm-hmm," he replied. Kate touched her cheek again, unconsciously. "This thing itches today." Tom looked at her, really looked, for 3 full seconds. "Get it checked." Kate stared at her husband, surprised by his directness. Tom Morrison was not a man who wasted words. When he spoke, it meant something. "It's been there since I was 20, Tom," she said, turning back to the ironing board. Tom said nothing more, but she felt his eyes on her cheek for another moment before he returned to gazing out the window. The comment unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She finished ironing in silence, hung the shirt carefully on a hanger, and went upstairs to get ready for church. In the bathroom, she examined the mole more closely under the harsh overhead light. Maybe it did look slightly different, a little darker around the edges. She pressed it gently, definitely tender. When she pulled her finger away, there was a tiny spot of blood on her fingertip. Kate washed her hands, applied a small bandage, and pushed the worry down where she kept all her other worries. She had a gift for compartmentalization, honed over 30 years of nursing. You couldn't fall apart every time something went wrong. You assessed, you acted, you moved forward. At St. Michael's Church, the Sunday service proceeded as it had for decades. Kate and Tom sat in their usual spot, 5th row, aisle seat. Tom always needed to be near an exit. She'd learned not to question it. Father Bernard, the chaplain, delivered his sermon with the quiet authority of a man who'd seen combat himself. Korean War, 1952. He understood his congregation of veterans in ways most clergy couldn't. "The body keeps the score, brothers and sisters," Father Bernard said, his weathered hands gripping the pulpit. "What we carry in silence, what we bury deep, eventually it demands to be heard. Our bodies remember what our minds try to forget." Tom's hand found Kate's, his grip tightening. She squeezed back, assuming the sermon had triggered something about his service. She didn't notice the way his eyes kept drifting to the bandage on her cheek. After the service, the usual social ritual unfolded. Veterans shook Tom's hand with silent nods, the language of men who'd seen things they couldn't speak about. Their wives hugged Kate, asked about Rachel and Dylan, admired her blouse. But Mrs. Henderson, an 80-year-old Gold Star widow whose son had died in Vietnam, stopped mid-conversation and stared at Kate's face. "You look tired, dear," she said, her hand reaching toward Kate's cheek but not quite touching it. Kate felt suddenly self-conscious. "Do I?" Mrs. Henderson smiled, but there was concern in her rheumy eyes. "Just take care of yourself. You spend so much time taking care of everyone else." In the car ride home, Kate pulled down the visor mirror and studied her reflection at a stoplight. The bandage looked stark against her skin. Beneath it she could feel the mole throbbing with her heartbeat. "Tom," she said quietly, "did I look different in church?" He kept his eyes on the road. "You should make an appointment." "It's just irritated from dry winter air," she said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "Kate?" Tom's voice was firmer than usual. "Please." She looked at him, this man who rarely asked her for anything, who carried 55 years of war in his silence. The "please" hung in the air between them, weighted with something she couldn't quite name. "After the church fundraiser," she said. "I'll call after that." Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. He'd learned long ago that you couldn't force Kate Morrison to do anything she hadn't decided to do herself. That night, the mole bled again when she washed her face. She applied more ointment, a fresh bandage, and went to bed telling herself it was nothing. February brought cold rain to Portland, the kind that seeped into old houses and older bones. The mole on Kate's cheek grew to 8 millimeters, raised and darker at the edges. She found herself applying concealer makeup for the first time in years, something she'd never bothered with during her nursing career. One evening, She caught Tom staring at her across the dinner table. Not the comfortable gazes of long marriage, but something more intense, worried. "You should," he started. "It's fine," she cut him off, perhaps too sharply. He looked down at his plate and said nothing more. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. By late March, the lesion had become impossible to ignore. It was now visible even through makeup, a dark, irregular shape that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Kate avoided mirrors when she could. On a Thursday afternoon, her 16-year-old grandson Dylan showed up at her door, backpack slung over one shoulder, with the excuse that he needed help with a history paper about the Vietnam War. Kate knew better. Dylan was an honors student who rarely needed academic help, but she welcomed him in and set about making hot chocolate the old-fashioned way, with real cocoa and milk on the stovetop. They sat at the kitchen table, Dylan's textbook open between them, but she noticed him glancing at her face repeatedly. "Just ask," Kate finally said, not unkindly. Dylan bit his lip, then pulled out his phone. "Grandma, we had a presentation in health class this week about skin cancer." Kate felt her stomach tighten. "Did you? There's this thing called the ABCDE rule." Dylan's voice cracked slightly. That teenage space between boy and man. "Asymmetry, border irregularity, color variation, diameter bigger than 6 millimeters, evolving." He looked up at her, his young face serious. "How long has that been on your face?" "Since before your mother was born," Kate said firmly. "It's always been there." "But has it always looked like that?" Dylan pulled up images on his phone, medical photographs of melanomas and carcinomas. "Mr. Chen, our health teacher, he showed us warning signs. That looks... Grandma, that looks exactly like the pictures." Kate reached across and gently pushed his phone down. "Dylan, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a nurse. I know what to look for." "Then why haven't you gone to a doctor?" His voice rose slightly. "Why are you covering it with makeup?" The question hit harder than Kate expected. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Dylan's eyes were shining now. "Grandpa Tom asked me to talk to you." Kate's world tilted slightly. "He what?" "Last week, he called me." Dylan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He said you wouldn't listen to him, but you might listen to me." "He's really scared, Grandma. I've never heard him sound like that." Kate stood abruptly, turning to the sink to hide the sudden moisture in her eyes. Tom. Her silent husband who never asked for help, who'd survived 2 years in hell without asking for anything, had called their teenage grandson because he was scared. "He thinks something's really wrong," Dylan continued behind her. "And I think he's right." Kate gripped the edge of the sink. In her nursing career, she'd seen this denial 1,000 times. Patients who ignored symptoms because acknowledging them made the threat real. Patients who put off appointments until after the holidays, or after the wedding, or after things settled down. She'd counseled them with gentle firmness about the importance of early detection. But standing here in her own kitchen, she understood their resistance for the first time. As long as she didn't get it checked, it could still be nothing. Schrödinger's diagnosis, simultaneously benign and malignant, until observed. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "Grandma, I said I'll think about it, Dylan." She turned back to face him, trying to smile. "Now, what did you actually need help with for this history paper?" Dylan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. They spent the next hour discussing the Vietnam War, dates, battles, political context. Kate found herself sharing more than she usually did about Tom's service, though she kept to the facts she knew. Tom had been 101st Airborne. He'd received a Purple Heart. He'd come home different than he'd left. What she didn't say, he still woke screaming some nights. He couldn't watch fireworks. He kept a metal box in the garage that he'd never shown her. He'd been carrying ghosts for 55 years. After Dylan left, Kate stood in the bathroom and really looked at her reflection for the first time in weeks. The lesion had grown to over a centimeter now, the borders jagged and irregular, colors ranging from dark brown to nearly black with red inflamed tissue around the edges. It was the face of denial staring back at her. That night, she made a decision. She'd call Rachel after the church bake sale, after Tom's VA appointment, after things settled down. Always after. The call came on a Sunday evening in early April, 8 months after Kate had first noticed the mole changing. Rachel Morrison Hayes sat in her Seattle apartment, staring at the text message Dylan had sent. "Mom, you need to call Grandma. Like, tonight. Please." Attached were 3 photos he'd taken surreptitiously while helping with dishes, close-ups of Kate's left cheek from different angles. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. As a dermatologist, she'd seen thousands of lesions. She knew a concerning presentation when she saw one, and this was beyond concerning. Her hand shook slightly as she dialed her mother's number. It rang 4 times before Kate answered. "Hi, honey." Kate's voice was warm but cautious. "This is a surprise." "Mom," Rachel kept her voice professionally neutral. "Dylan sent me some photos of your face." Silence on the other end. "I need you to send me a better picture. In good lighting. No makeup." "Rachel, it's nothing." "Mom?" Rachel's voice cracked slightly. "Please, for me?" Another long pause, then, "Let me call you back." 5 minutes later, Rachel's phone chimed. The image that appeared made her stomach clench. Under harsh bathroom lighting, the lesion was clearly visible, roughly 12 millimeters, asymmetric, with irregular borders and color variation. The center appeared ulcerated. Rachel immediately called back. "Where are you right now?" "Home." "Tom's in the garage. I'm calling Dr. Marcus Webb. He's a colleague at Emmanuel. He owes me a favor." Rachel was already pulling up contacts on her laptop. "I need you to see him first thing Monday." "Honey, it's Sunday night. You don't need to. It's squamous cell carcinoma, Mom." Or worse. Rachel couldn't keep the medical terminology at bay any longer. "That lesion shows every warning sign. How long has it looked like that?" Kate's voice became small. "A few months." "Define a few." "Since January. Maybe late December." Rachel closed her eyes. 4 months minimum. "Why didn't you call me?" "You've been dealing with a divorce. Dylan's college applications, your practice. I didn't want to." "I'm your daughter." Rachel's voice broke completely now. "And I'm a dermatologist. This is literally what I do." "I know." Kate's voice was barely audible. "I just kept thinking it would get better on its own." Rachel wiped her eyes roughly. "I'm flying down tomorrow. First flight I can get." "Rachel, that's not necessary." "I'm already booking it." Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. "There's a 6 a.m. that gets in at 8. Dad can pick me up." "Honey." "Mom." Rachel stopped typing, her voice softening. "Please, let me do this. I should have been there months ago. I should have visited at Christmas. I should have... She couldn't finish the sentence. The divorce had consumed her for 2 years. She'd been so focused on her own pain, her own failed marriage, that she'd let her parents drift into the background. Monthly phone calls, texts on birthdays, always meaning to visit, always too busy. And now this. "Okay," Kate finally whispered. "Okay." After they hung up, Rachel immediately called Dr. Marcus Webb, her former mentor and one of the best oncological surgeons in the Pacific Northwest. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Rachel, it's 10:30 on a Sunday. Marcus, I need you to look at something." She sent him the photos. "That's my mother." A long pause, then, "When can she come in?" "Tomorrow morning. I'm flying down tonight." "Rachel." His voice held the gentle sympathy of someone who'd delivered bad news too many times. "You know what this looks like." "I know." Her voice was steady now, switching fully into clinical mode. It was the only way to function. "I need a full workup. CT, metabolic panel, biopsy. I'll clear my Monday morning. Bring her in at 8:30. After confirming the details, Rachel sat alone in her dark apartment, phone in her lap. She thought about her mother, the woman who'd nursed her through childhood illnesses, who'd taught her to be strong, who'd shown her what dedication looked like by working 30 years at the VA hospital. The woman who'd held Rachel together through her divorce, who'd taken Dylan for entire summers when Rachel needed space to heal. And Rachel had been too absorbed in her own life to notice her mother was sick. She thought about calling her ex-husband, then decided against it. This wasn't his problem anymore. She called Dylan instead. "Mom?" He answered on the 1st ring. "Thank you for sending me those photos. Is Grandma going to be okay?" Rachel couldn't lie to him. "I don't know, baby. But we're going to make sure she gets the best care possible." She heard him sniffle on the other end. "I'm scared." "Me too," Rachel admitted. "Me too." The 6 a.m. flight from Seattle to Portland felt interminable. Rachel stared out the window at the clouds below, her mind running through differentials, treatment protocols, survival statistics. Squamous cell carcinoma was the 2nd most common skin cancer, highly treatable if caught early. But this didn't look early. This looked like it had been growing for months, possibly invading deep tissue. Stage 3, maybe. Possibly stage 4 if there was lymph node involvement. She thought about the enlarged lymph nodes Marcus would undoubtedly find, thought about the surgical margins that would be required, thought about her mother's face, forever changed. Tom was waiting at the airport, standing by his old Chevy with the stoic posture of a man who'd learned to wade through worse things than this. He was wearing a button-down shirt and clean jeans, his version of dressing up. Rachel hugged him tightly. He stood stiff for a moment, then his arms came around her. "She wouldn't listen to me," he said quietly, his voice rough. It might have been the longest sentence Rachel had heard from her father in years. "I know, Dad." The drive to their house was silent. Rachel watched the familiar Portland suburbs roll past, the coffee shop where she'd worked in high school, the park where Dylan had learned to ride a bike, the streets that held 42 years of her life. Kate was waiting in the kitchen, already dressed. The morning light was unforgiving, making the lesions stand out starkly against her pale skin. Rachel saw her mother flinch slightly as Rachel's professional gaze assessed the damage. "Hi, honey," Kate said, her voice determinedly cheerful. "Coffee?" "No time." Rachel kept her voice gentle but firm. "Dr. Webb is expecting us at 8:30. The drive to Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center took 20 minutes. Rachel held her mother's hand in the back seat while Tom drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. At the hospital, Rachel walked the familiar corridors with her mother, now wearing her white coat like armor. Dr. Marcus Webb met them in his office, a man in his early 60s with kind eyes and a surgical scar visible on his neck. "Mrs. Morrison," he greeted Kate, then lifted his shirt slightly to show a long surgical scar across his abdomen. "Melanoma, stage 3, 15 years ago. I know what it's like to be on this side of the diagnosis." Kate's eyes filled with tears at the gesture of vulnerability. The examination was thorough. Marcus palpated Kate's face, her neck, her lymph nodes. Rachel watched her mother's face, trying to maintain dignity while being examined, the nurse in her analyzing even as the patient in her trembled. "We'll do a biopsy now," Marcus said. "Local anesthetic. Results should be back by Wednesday. The procedure took 20 minutes. Rachel held her mother's hand as Marcus removed a 4-millimeter punch of tissue, cauterized the small vessels, applied a bandage. "Mrs. Morrison," Marcus said gently, cleaning his instruments, "I am also going to order a CT scan and full metabolic panel. I noticed your lymph nodes are enlarged bilaterally." Kate's nurse brain kicked in. "That's not typical for squamous cell." "No," Marcus agreed, "it's not. Which is why I want the full picture." After the appointment, sitting in the hospital cafeteria, Kate finally broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Rachel. "I should have called you sooner." "No." Rachel took her mother's hands. "I should have been here. I should have visited. I've been so wrapped up in my own problems that I forgot." Her voice broke. "You spent 30 years taking care of everyone else, and when you needed help, you didn't know how to ask." Tom, sitting across from them, spoke quietly. "She learned that from me." Both women looked at him. 55 years, he continued, his voice steady but strained. "I never asked for help. Never talked about the war. Just carried it." He met Kate's eyes. "You learned to carry everything alone because I taught you that's what strong people do." The waiting was a particular kind of torture. Monday blurred into Tuesday. Kate tried to maintain her routines, ironing Tom's shirts, baking cornbread, organizing the church newsletter. But her hands shook when she thought no one was looking, and she caught herself touching the bandage on her cheek compulsively. Tom never left her side. He followed her from room to room like a shadow, not speaking, but present. At night he slept in the recliner next to their bed, something he hadn't done since the worst of his PTSD years in the 80s. "You don't have to do that," Kate said the second night. "Yes," Tom replied simply. "I do." Rachel had taken a week off work, staying in her old childhood bedroom. The house felt full in a way it hadn't in years, though the fullness was weighted with dread. On Tuesday afternoon, Kate found Tom in the garage, standing over his workbench. The metal box, the one she'd glimpsed over the years but never asked about, sat open in front of him. He was holding something small, turning it over in his weathered hands. "Tom?" She stepped closer. He didn't startle. After 46 years, he knew her footsteps. "Just remembering," he said quietly. She peered into the box. Inside were letters, her letters, the ones she'd written him during his deployment, 1968 to 1970. She'd thought he'd thrown them away. There was also his Purple Heart, a piece of fabric she recognized as her old nursing uniform from 1978, and photographs. Many photographs. Her breath caught. The photos were all of her, dated photos spanning decades, and recent ones, close-ups of her cheek, dated and documented, showing the progression of the lesion over months. "You've been tracking it," she whispered. "Since October." His voice was rough. "Maybe earlier."
I kept hoping I was wrong. Kate picked up one of the photos from January, the mole barely raised, still small. Then one from March, visibly larger, irregular edges. She'd been so good at not seeing it herself. "Why didn't you say something?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Because if I didn't say the words out loud, maybe it wouldn't be real." He set down what he'd been holding, a small piece of shrapnel in a clear case. "I know what cancer looks like. I watched it take my mother in 6 months. Watched her face change. Watched her fade." He finally looked at Kate, and his eyes were wet. "I couldn't say the words because once I said them, I'd have to face losing you." Kate moved to him, wrapping her arms around his solid frame. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "I'm scared," she admitted for the first time. "I know," he whispered back. "Me too." Wednesday morning arrived with gray skies and steady rain. The call from Dr. Webb's office came at 9:15. "Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Webb would like to see you and your family this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Kate's hand trembled as she hung up. Rachel appeared in the kitchen doorway immediately, reading her mother's expression. "Today?" Rachel asked. Kate nodded. Tom was already reaching for his jacket. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Kate watched raindrops race down the car window, thinking absurdly about which one would reach the bottom first. Anything to not think about what was coming. Dr. Webb's office was familiar now. Dark wood furniture, medical journals on shelves, framed certifications on the walls. The man himself sat behind his desk, Rachel in her white coat standing beside him. Tom took the chair next to Kate, his hand finding hers immediately. "Kate," Dr. Webb began, his voice gentle but professional. "The biopsy confirmed squamous cell carcinoma, invasive type. Based on the depth of penetration we saw in the sample and the clinical presentation, I'm classifying this as stage 3. Kate heard the words through a strange filter, as if underwater. Stage 3. The nurse in her knew what that meant. 5-year survival rate around 75 to 80% with aggressive treatment, which meant a 20 to 25% chance of dying within 5 years. "What does that mean?" Tom asked, his voice tight. "In numbers?" "If we operate immediately with wide local excision and lymph node dissection, combined with potential radiation therapy, the prognosis is generally favorable," Webb explained. "But I won't sugarcoat this. The surgery will be extensive." He pulled up imaging on his computer screen, the CT scans from earlier in the week. Kate saw the cross-sections of her own face, the tumor visible as a dark mass. "We're looking at removing approximately 4 centimeters of tissue, possibly more, depending on what we find during surgery. That includes skin, subcutaneous fat, likely part of the parotid gland, and we'll need to assess the facial nerve branches." Rachel spoke up, her doctor voice steady. "You're saying her face will be significantly altered?" "Yes," Webb met Kate's eyes. "I'll be removing part of your cheek, Mrs. Morrison. Reconstruction will come later, after we're certain we've eliminated all cancer cells. But I need you to understand this is not a minor procedure. Your face will look different afterward." Kate absorbed this, her free hand moving unconsciously to her cheek. She'd be disfigured. The vanity of the thought embarrassed her, but it was there The ones that are enlarged. Has it metastasized? Webb pulled up more images. This is actually where things get interesting. The cancer itself hasn't spread to the lymph nodes. They're clear. But, he pointed to areas on the scan, your mother has extensive chronic inflammation throughout her upper respiratory tract and lymphatic system, significant scar tissue. It's unusual. He turned to Kate. Have you been exposed to industrial chemicals? Toxins? Anything in your work history? Kate thought back through decades of nursing. I worked wound care at the VA hospital 30 years. I handled a lot of... She paused. I took care of Vietnam veterans. Their wounds. Their contaminated clothing before proper protocols were established. Tom's hand tightened painfully around hers. Agent Orange, he said, his voice hollow. She was exposed through me, through my patients, through... He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Everyone looked at him. I brought it home, Tom said, his voice rising. For 46 years, on my clothes, in my skin, the poison from the jungle. I gave this to her. I gave my wife cancer. Tom, that's not, Rachel started, but Tom was already walking out, his movements stiff and mechanical. Kate moved to follow him, but Rachel put a hand on her shoulder. Let me. Rachel found her father in the stairwell, sitting on the concrete steps, head in his hands. She sat beside him, this man who had been a pillar of silent strength her entire life, now crumbling. I killed her, he said. Just like I killed my mother. The poison. It doesn't wash out. It stays. It spreads. Dad, secondary exposure to Agent Orange is possible, but don't... Tom's voice cracked. Don't give me statistics or medical explanations. I know what I know. I've been carrying death inside me for 55 years. And I passed it to the woman I love. The surgery was scheduled for the first Monday in May. Kate Morrison woke at 5:30 in the morning to Tom already dressed in his only suit, the one he wore for church and funerals. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Rachel appeared at 6, her hair pulled back severely, wearing scrubs. She'd pulled strings to be allowed in the operating room as an observer. Dylan arrived minutes later with Kate's mother's old rosary, the beads worn smooth from decades of prayers. Grandma, I know you're Methodist, Dylan said, pressing the rosary into her palm. But Great-Grandma Helen was Catholic, and she always said prayers work no matter who's saying them. Kate kissed his forehead, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. At Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center, the pre-operative ritual unfolded with clinical efficiency. 1-5 started, vitals checked, consent forms signed. Dr. Webb appeared in surgical scrubs and once again lifted his shirt to show Kate his scar. Their shared ritual now, a promise without words. I'll take care of you, he said simply. Webb took a surgical marker and drew on Kate's face, lines marking the excision area. 4 centimeters by 5 centimeters, nearly her entire left cheek. Kate watched in a hand mirror, seeing her face transformed into a surgical map. Rachel stepped out briefly, her professional composure cracking. In the hallway, she whispered to Webb, "That's almost her whole cheek." "I need clean margins," Webb replied firmly. "I won't leave cancer behind." When the orderlies came to wheel Kate to the operating room, Tom leaned close and whispered in her ear, words only she could hear. Her eyes filled with tears. 46 years, I should have said it more," he murmured. "I love you, Kate. I love you." Then she was moving down the corridor, fluorescent lights passing overhead like falling stars, and the world faded to chemical sleep. In the waiting room, time became elastic. Tom sat rigid in an uncomfortable chair, his military posture perfect, his hands gripped together so tightly his knuckles were white. Dylan attempted homework he couldn't concentrate on. Rachel paced until her feet hurt. After an hour, Chaplain Father Bernard appeared, the Korean War veteran who knew what it meant to wait for news about people you loved. "Thought you could use company," Bernard said, settling into a chair beside Tom. Tom said nothing. They sat in silence for 20 minutes before Tom finally spoke. 1969. Firebase Barbara. My lieutenant ordered us to burn a village. Civilians still inside. I refused. Pushed him. They called it insubordination. His voice was flat, emotionless. Sent me on the worst patrols after that. Punishment detail. That's how I got hit. The Purple Heart isn't for bravery, Father. It's for disobedience. Bernard nodded slowly. You protected civilians. That takes more courage than following orders. I've carried the shame for 55 years, and now Kate's paying for my sins. Or, Bernard said carefully, she's teaching you what grace looks like, what it means to carry someone else's burden without resentment. At hour 3, a surgical nurse appeared. Dr. Webb says the excision is complete. He's checking margins now. It'll be a few more hours. Rachel disappeared behind the surgical doors, needing to see with her own eyes. In the observation area above the operating room, Rachel looked down at her mother on the table. The surgical field was exposed, a gaping wound where Kate's cheek had been. Rachel could see bone. Her professional detachment wavered dangerously. She watched Webb work with meticulous precision, checking tissue samples under a microscope, ensuring clear margins. The man was an artist, and his canvas was her mother's face. When Rachel returned to the waiting room, her expression told the story before words could. Tom stood immediately. How bad? They had to remove more than expected. Rachel's voice was clinical, the only way she could function. The parotid gland, several facial nerve branches, part of the zygomatic bone. What does that mean? Dylan asked, his teenage face pale. It means Grandma's face will be different. She won't be able to smile on that side. The nerve damage is permanent. Tom sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. At hour 6, Dr. Webb finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. We got clean margins, he said immediately. The cancer is out. Relief flooded the room like oxygen. But, Webb continued, we found something during the procedure, something unexpected. He pulled out his tablet, showing them an image of a small, metallic object in a specimen container. Foreign object, embedded in the deep tissue, approximately 2 centimeters below the tumor site. It's been there for decades. We've sent it to pathology for analysis, but preliminary assessment suggests it's steel alloy, medical grade. The tumor appears to have formed as a response to chronic foreign body inflammation. Tom stood slowly. It's mine. Shrapnel from Vietnam. Car accident, 1978. We were both bleeding. His voice broke. A piece of me has been in her for 46 years. And it gave her cancer. The first day after surgery, Kate lay in the ICU, intubated and heavily sedated. Her face was swathed in bandages, surgical drains protruding from the wound site. Tom pulled a chair to her bedside and didn't move. The nurses knew better than to enforce visiting hours. One look at this Vietnam veteran's face told them he wouldn't be leaving his post. Rachel stayed at the hospital, sleeping in the residence lounge between check-ins. Dylan brought his grandfather food that went uneaten. Tom just sat, holding Kate's hand, watching the monitors with the intensity of a man who'd learned to read danger in subtle signs. By day 2, Kate's temperature began to rise, a low-grade fever, 101 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Webb increased antibiotics prophylactically, but his face showed concern. On day 3, the fever spiked to 103. The surgical site showed signs of infection, purulent drainage, increased swelling, angry red tissue. Kate became more deeply sedated as her body fought sepsis. Rachel found Webb in the ICU, staring at Kate's chart. "Why isn't the vancomycin working?" Webb shook his head grimly. The foreign body created a biofilm environment over decades. The bacteria are resistant to standard antibiotics. Tom, sitting 10 feet away, heard every word. "The shrapnel is killing her." Day 4 arrived with gray morning light. At 6:47 a.m., the monitors began screaming. Code blue. Medical staff flooded into the room. Rachel and Tom were physically pushed out as the team worked to save Kate's life. Septic shock, blood pressure plummeting, multiple organ systems beginning to fail. Tom stood frozen in the hallway, his back against the wall. Rachel had never seen her father cry. Not at his mother's funeral, not when he'd held his newborn daughter, not in 42 years of knowing him. But now tears streamed down his weathered face as he slid slowly down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. Dylan found him there 20 minutes later, called by Rachel's frantic text. The teenager sat beside his grandfather, this man who'd always seemed indestructible, now broken. "I can't lose her," Tom whispered, his voice raw. "She's the only thing that made me clean after the war. The only thing that made me human." Inside the room, the medical team worked with controlled urgency, aggressive fluid resuscitation, vasopressor drugs to maintain blood pressure, broad-spectrum antibiotics. Dr. Webb made the call for emergent surgical debridement. They needed to remove the infected tissue immediately. 3 hours later, Webb emerged from the second surgery, his scrubs stained with blood. Unusual for him to show this to family, but exhaustion had stripped away professional distance. "She's alive," he said. "Barely." We debrided the surgical site, removed more tissue. Rachel's voice was steady, clinical. "How much more?" "Enough that reconstruction will be extremely challenging." Webb ran a hand over his face. "The infection was more extensive than the scans showed. I had to take tissue we'd hoped to preserve." That night, Kate remained on a ventilator, sedated to the edge of consciousness. Multiple IV drips, monitors covering every surface. Tom sat beside her bed, holding her hand, staring at the rise and fall of her chest with mechanical breathing. He hadn't spoken in 8 hours. Rachel watched her father from the doorway. This man who'd been a silent pillar her entire life, now utterly shattered. Dylan sat with him in the dim ICU light. "She's tough, Grandpa," Dylan offered quietly. Tom's voice, when it came, was hollow. "Not as tough as the guilt that's killing her." "You didn't give her cancer. Then why did my shrapnel cause the infection that's killing her now?" At 2 a.m, Father Bernard appeared. How he knew to come, Rachel never asked. The old chaplain sat on Tom's other side, saying nothing, just presence. After a long silence, Bernard spoke softly. "Korea, 1952. Lost my best friend to infection from a shrapnel wound. Wasn't the wound that killed him. Wasn't the shrapnel. Was his refusal to get help because he didn't want to burden anyone. Tom looked up slowly. Your Kate refused help for 8 months, Bernard continued.
Not because of you. Because you taught her by example that strong people carry everything alone. Tom's face crumpled. I did that. I taught her to hide pain. You both did what soldiers do. You survived. But surviving isn't the same as living. On day 5, late afternoon, Kate's eyes fluttered open. The ventilator tube had been removed. She was breathing on her own. Tom was leaning close when her eyes focused. Tom? Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from intubation. I'm here. His hand gripped hers tightly. Am I dying? No. Tom's voice cracked. Not on my watch. Kate tried to touch her face, but her hands were restrained, standard ICU protocol to prevent patients from pulling at tubes. How bad? Rachel stepped forward, her doctor voice carefully controlled. Mom, you had complications. A serious infection. We had to do a second surgery to remove infected tissue. Tell me the truth. Rachel's composure broke. Your face is... It's different, Mom. Different how? Webb appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Morrison, you're cancer-free. We got clear margins. But the infection required aggressive debridement. We had to remove more tissue than originally planned. Kate processed this with her nurse's brain. Prognosis? Medically, excellent. The infection is responding to treatment now, but cosmetically, the damage is extensive. Your cheek, parts of your jaw, facial nerve. Kate looked at Tom. What happened? What caused the infection? Tom's face was anguished. The foreign object. My shrapnel. I gave you cancer and infection both. But Kate's eyes were clearing, memory returning through the medication fog. Tom, stop. The metal in your face isn't yours. Kate's voice was weak but firm. I remember now. The car accident, 1978. You weren't bleeding from your back that day. I was bleeding. Internal injuries. Emergency surgery at the VA. She paused, gathering strength. They used surgical staples to stop the bleeding. Dozens of them. Everyone in the room went still. One must have migrated, Kate continued. Over 46 years, traveled through tissue. That's what was in my face, not your shrapnel, my surgical staple. Tom sank into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. But the Agent Orange, your lymph nodes, the inflammation is real, Webb interjected, but not the primary cause of the cancer. The pathology report arrived the next day. Dr. Webb called the family into a conference room, tablet in hand. The foreign object analysis is complete, he said. It's not shrapnel. It's a surgical staple, stainless steel, medical grade, consistent with emergency surgery techniques from the 1970s. He pulled up images. This type of migration is extremely rare, but documented. One staple from Mrs. Morrison's abdominal repair in 1978 traveled over 4 decades through fascial planes until it lodged in the subcutaneous tissue of her left cheek. The chronic foreign body reaction triggered cellular changes that eventually became cancerous. Rachel looked at her father. Dad, you didn't cause this.
but Tom's face showed confusion warring with relief. "The VA letter. About Agent Orange exposure. Her lymph nodes are another issue entirely," Webb confirmed, "but not the primary cause of this cancer." As if on cue, Dylan appeared with mail he'd collected from his grandparents' house. Among the bills and advertisements was an official envelope from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Rachel read it aloud to the room. "Dear Mrs. Morrison, our records indicate you were employed at Portland VA Medical Center from 1975 to 2005. During this period, you may have been exposed to Agent Orange contamination through direct patient care of Vietnam veterans. Secondary exposure risks include handling contaminated clothing, bandages, and providing wound care to exposed veterans. Recent studies confirm healthcare workers treating Vietnam veterans faced significant exposure risks. You may be eligible for VA healthcare benefits and compensation." The letter continued with details about exposure protocols, or rather, the lack of them, during the decades Kate had worked. No protective equipment, no monitoring, no acknowledgement that nurses treating contaminated patients were themselves being poisoned. Kate stared at the letter. "I was exposed for 30 years. Not through you bringing it home, Tom. Through my work. Through caring for hundreds of Vietnam veterans whose bodies were saturated with chemicals. But I still brought it home," Tom insisted. "My uniforms, my skin." "Maybe," Kate said gently. "But the VA exposed me first, every day, for 3 decades. She looked at the letter again. "The same system that sent you to war with chemical weapons. The same system that didn't protect the nurses healing the soldiers they'd poisoned." The implications settled over the room like fallout. Rachel was already on her phone, searching. "Mom, this is bigger than just you. There are articles, studies." She held up her screen. "The VA has been denying secondary exposure claims for years. But recent evidence shows healthcare workers, especially wound care nurses in the 70s and 80s, had exposure levels comparable to veterans themselves." A local reporter somehow got wind of the story. A leak from the hospital, perhaps. Within days, Kate's case became a flashpoint. A healthcare worker poisoned by the very system she'd devoted her life to serving. A veteran's wife caught between her husband's war and her own service. The investigative pieces revealed what VA internal documents had long shown: inadequate protocols for handling contaminated materials throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Wound care nurses faced the highest exposure risks. No protective equipment provided. No monitoring of healthcare workers' health. Hundreds, possibly thousands, potentially exposed like Kate. It wasn't a conspiracy of evil. It was a conspiracy of indifference. One evening, as Kate sat in her hospital bed, stronger now but still facing weeks of recovery, she looked at Tom with sudden clarity. "We were both casualties," she said. "Different battlefields, same war. You fought it in the jungle, I fought it in a hospital. But the same poison got us both." Tom took her hand. "I'm so sorry." "For what? Surviving? Coming home? Letting me love you?" Kate shook her head. "Tom, you gave me 46 years of marriage. You gave me Rachel. You gave me Dylan. You gave me a life." Her voice softened. "You didn't give me cancer. The war did, to both of us." In Tom's metal box, the one Kate now knew contained decades of silent love, there was one more document she hadn't seen: his discharge papers. Rachel read them aloud. Disorderly conduct, insubordination, assault of superior officer. She looked at her father. "What did you do?" Tom was silent for a long moment. Then, "Firebase Barbara, 1969. Lieutenant ordered us to burn a village, civilians still inside. I said no. He pulled rank. I pushed him." The weight of 55 years hung in those words. "They sent me on the most dangerous patrols after that. Punishment detail. That's how I got hit with shrapnel. The Purple Heart wasn't for valor. It was for refusing to murder innocents." Dylan was already searching on his phone. "Grandpa?" "Firebase Barbara. There are declassified documents, news articles about veterans getting their discharges corrected for refusing to participate in war crimes." Tom's voice was bitter. "Too late for that." "No," Dylan said firmly. "It's never too late for the truth." Late June brought warm sunshine to Portland, the kind that made hospital rooms feel almost cheerful. Kate sat in a chair by the window, strong enough now to be discharged. The bandages had been removed that morning. Rachel held up a mirror with visible reluctance. "Mom, are you ready?" Kate took the mirror with steady hands. The face looking back was barely recognizable. The left side of her cheek was gone, leaving a hollow depression where flesh used to be. Her eye drooped from nerve damage. The right side of her face remained frozen, unable to smile or frown. A massive scar ran from her cheekbone to her jaw. The room was silent for a full minute. "Well," Kate finally said, her voice carefully neutral, "that's something." "Mom," Rachel's voice broke, "I look like a monster." Dylan, standing by the door, stepped forward. "No, Grandma. You look like a warrior." Kate's one working eye filled with tears. She touched the scar gently, feeling the ridged tissue under her fingertips. This was her face now, forever. 2 days later, Dr. Lisa Fernandez, a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, came to discuss options. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an iPad full of before and after photos. "Mrs. Morrison, I want to walk you through your reconstruction options." She presented 3 paths. Free flap surgery, using tissue from Kate's thigh to rebuild her cheek. A 12-hour procedure costing $180,000, with insurance covering perhaps 60%. A custom silicone prosthetic that would attach daily, $15,000 initially, then $3,000 annually for maintenance and replacement. Or acceptance, living with the surgical result as it was. Rachel immediately advocated for the first option. "Mom, insurance will cover most of it. We can figure out the rest." "Most isn't all," Kate replied. Tom spoke quietly from his position by the window. "I have savings. Retirement money." "That's for your retirement, Tom. For both of us." "What's the point of retirement if you're not there to share it?" Kate asked for 3 days to decide. She spent those days in quiet contemplation, looking at old photographs, her face before, confident and whole in every image, her wedding photo, pictures with baby Rachel, family vacations, her nursing school graduation. On the 3rd day, she called everyone into her hospital room. "I'm not doing reconstruction," she said firmly. Rachel started to protest, but Kate held up her hand. "I've spent 46 years watching Tom hide his scars, his trauma, the cost of war." Hiding it because society didn't want to see it, didn't want to acknowledge what we ask of soldiers and their families. She touched her ruined cheek. "I'm not hiding anymore. This face tells the truth about what war costs. Not just the soldiers. Everyone.
The wives who wash contaminated uniforms. The nurses who treat poisoned bodies. The families who carry the weight of violence done and violence endured. She looked at Tom. You taught me to hide pain, to be strong by being silent. But that silence almost killed me. I'm done hiding. Tom crossed the room and took her hand. You're sure? I'm sure. Kate's voice was steady. This scar is honest. It tells the story we've been too afraid to tell. On July 4th, St. Michael's Church held its annual Independence Day Veteran Memorial Service. Father Bernard had asked Tom to speak, his first public words about Vietnam in 55 years. Kate insisted on being there, released from the hospital just 2 days earlier. She wore a simple blue dress and no makeup, no attempt to hide her disfigured face. Tom wore his only suit. Rachel and Dylan flanked her like protective bookends as they walked down the church aisle. Heads turned. Some people tried not to stare, others couldn't help it. Kate kept her head high. Tom stood at the podium, a piece of paper shaking in his hands. He'd written his speech longhand, crossing out and rewriting lines dozens of times. 55 years ago, he began, his voice rough but carrying, I came home from Vietnam. I brought back shrapnel in my spine, poison in my blood, and shame in my heart. The church was absolutely silent. I thought I gave my wife cancer. I was wrong about the cause, but I was right that I'd harmed her. He paused, looking directly at Kate. Not with shrapnel or chemicals, with silence. With the lesson that strong people carry everything alone, that asking for help is weakness, that hiding pain is noble. His voice grew stronger. My Kate spent 30 years at the VA hospital. She washed the wounds of men the government had soaked in Agent Orange. She handled their contaminated clothing, breathed the chemicals off their skin, absorbed the poison through her own hands. No protective gear, no warnings, no acknowledgement that she was being poisoned by the same war that poisoned us. Tom's hands gripped the podium. When she got sick, cancer growing in her face, she waited 8 months to get help. Because I'd taught her that's what you do. You suffer in silence. You don't burden others. You push through until you can't anymore. His voice cracked. She almost died because of what I taught her, because of what the war taught me. He looked out at the congregation, dozens of veterans, their wives, their children and grandchildren. So, when you thank a veteran today, thank their families too. Thank the spouses who wash the nightmares away. Thank the nurses who heal our bodies while their own are being destroyed. Thank everyone who carries the cost of war that we don't want to see. Tom stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation. Veterans were crying. Men who hadn't wept in decades were openly weeping. Kate stood and walked to join her husband at the podium. She turned to face the congregation, her scarred face visible to everyone. I'd do it again, she said clearly. Every day, for every veteran. I don't regret my 30 years of service. But the system needs to change. No healthcare worker should be poisoned caring for soldiers. No soldier should carry guilt for surviving. She pointed to her scar. This is what we don't talk about. The hidden casualties, the lingering poison, the cost that doesn't end when the war ends. Let's talk about it. The video of their speeches was posted online by someone in the congregation. Within 48 hours,
It had 2.4 million views. Media requests flooded in. A GoFundMe started by the church raised $47,000 in 3 days. Kate refused the money. Give it to VA healthcare worker safety programs, to research, to protective equipment. Make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. An Oregon senator contacted Kate directly. Would she testify before a committee on healthcare worker protections? Kate agreed immediately. The VA, initially defensive, launched an internal investigation. The findings were damning. Inadequate protocols spanning 3 decades, highest exposure risks for wound care nurses, no protective equipment provided, no health monitoring. In Oregon alone, 347 healthcare workers who'd treated Vietnam veterans came forward for screening. 23 were referred for further testing. 4 early-stage cancers were detected and treated. Kate's case had saved lives. In early August, a letter arrived at Tom and Kate's home. Official Department of Defense letterhead. Board for Correction of Military Records. Tom opened it with shaking hands. Rachel and Kate stood beside him as he read. His dishonorable discharge had been corrected to honorable. The reasoning? Refusal to participate in actions later classified as war crimes. Demonstrated moral courage under duress. He was awarded the Soldier's Medal, given for acts of heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy, for protecting civilians, for choosing morality over orders. The letter included notification of back pay, $127,000 in veterans' benefits denied for 55 years. Tom stared at the paper, reading it over and over. Finally, he handed it to Kate without speaking. Kate read it, tears streaming down her ruined face. "Tom, they said it. You were right. You were always right." Tom's voice was hollow. 55 years. "But they said it now." Kate took his hands. "You're not a coward. You never were." A small ceremony was held at the local VFW post. Father Bernard presented Tom with his corrected discharge certificate and the Soldier's Medal. The old chaplain's voice was thick with emotion. "Welcome home, soldier." Honorably. Tom broke then, decades of shame finally cracking open. He wept in front of a room full of veterans who understood exactly what those tears meant. On August 15th, their 47th wedding anniversary, Tom and Kate renewed their vows at St. Michael's Church. It was a small ceremony. Immediate family, Father Bernard, a handful of their veteran community. Kate wore a simple dress, her scar fully visible. No veil, no makeup, no hiding. Tom wore his dress uniform for the first time since 1970, the new Soldier's Medal pinned beside his Purple Heart. They stood before the altar, and Tom pulled out a piece of paper. His hands shook as he read. "Catherine, 47 years ago I said I do. I didn't say everything else I should have. I didn't say, you'll carry my nightmares. You'll wash poison from my clothes. You'll pay for my war with your body." He set the paper down and spoke from memory. "But you did. All of it, without complaint, without resentment. I love you. I should have said it every day, and I'm saying it now, and every day forward. You saved me, Kate, not from the war, from myself. This time I promise. No more silence." Kate spoke without notes, looking directly at Tom. "I knew what I was marrying. I saw the shrapnel scars on our first date. I saw the nightmares on our honeymoon. I chose you every day. I'd choose you again." She touched her scarred face. "This is the face of loving a veteran. The face of 30 years healing warriors, the face of survival. I wouldn't trade it, because it means I spent 47 years with you. And if God gives us more time, I'll take it, scars and all." They kissed gently, Tom careful of her damaged cheek. Kate whispered against his lips, "You send me." Tom smiled, a real smile, the first in months. "Always have." Dylan had arranged for the church's old radio to play their song. "You Send Me" filled the sanctuary as the small congregation applauded. That evening, back home, Kate and Tom sat at their kitchen table. The metal box, no longer hidden, was open between them. All its contents laid out like archaeological artifacts of a long marriage. The Purple Heart, now displayed rather than hidden. The new soldier's medal and honorable discharge certificate. Letters Kate had written 55 years ago, yellowed but preserved. The original wedding ring from 1978, photographs spanning decades. And the surgical staple, preserved in clear acrylic, not thrown away, but kept as evidence of survival. Kate picked up the staple, holding it to the evening light. "This little thing, 46 years inside me. Should we throw it away now?" Tom asked. "No." Kate's answer was immediate. "Same reason you kept the shrapnel they pulled from your back. Not to remember the pain. To remember we survived it." Tom pulled out the original wedding ring from 1978, tarnished but intact. "I want you to wear this again. I bought it with deployment money. Carried it through Firebase Barbara. Carried it home. Put it on your finger when I finally found the courage to ask." Kate held out her left hand. Tom slid the old ring on, removing the one she'd worn for decades. "Marry me again," Tom said. "Every day. With words this time. Real words." "What do you want to do with the time we have left?" Kate asked softly. "Talk." Tom's voice was firm. "I want to talk to you. Tell you about the war. Hear about your patients. Say I love you until you're sick of hearing it." "I'll never be sick of it." Tom reached across the table, taking both her hands. "The staple, the shrapnel, the Agent Orange, the cancer, all of it trying to separate us. But here we are, still together. Scarred, but together," Kate agreed. "Maybe the scars are proof." "Of what?" "That we're both warriors. You with your surgical scar, me with my shrapnel wounds and 55 years of shame that finally broke. We survived the war. We survived the cancer. We survived the silence that almost killed us both." Kate squeezed his hands. "What do we do now?" "We live," Tom said simply. "Out loud, with our scars showing. We tell the truth. We help others tell their truth. We make sure no one else carries poison in silence for 55 years. The next morning, Sunday, the ritual resumed. 7:15 a.m., Kate ironing Tom's blue shirt, though her scarred hands moved slower now, less steady. The radio playing "You Send Me." Cornbread baking, the recipe from Tom's mother, made every Sunday for 47 years. But something was different now. Tom didn't stare silently out the window. He watched Kate, and when she looked at him, he smiled. "Beautiful," he said. Kate's ruined face managed a half-smile, the right side still paralyzed. Liar. Never about that. Dylan arrived with his college acceptance letter, pre-med at Portland State.
His essay had been titled The Hidden Casualties, Agent Orange and Healthcare Workers, dedicated to Catherine Morrison, RN, Warrior. Rachel appeared an hour later with news. She'd taken a position at Legacy Emmanuel. "Someone needs to keep an eye on you, too," she said, but her eyes were soft. "And Dylan needs his mother around more. I've been running from family for too long."
That evening, the four of them sat around the dinner table, something that hadn't happened in years. Kate struggled with soup, the facial nerve damage making eating difficult. But no one looked away. This was family. This was love. This was what survival looked like. Tom reached for Kate's hand across the table. She took it without hesitation. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up. On me. On us. For surviving. For showing me that scars can be beautiful." Kate looked at her husband, her daughter, her grandson. 3 generations bound by war's legacy and love's persistence. "We're all still here," she said. "That's what matters. We're still here, together, finally telling the truth." Outside, the summer evening faded to twilight. Inside, the Morrison family sat in the warm kitchen light, eating dinner, talking, laughing. The sound of a family learning to live out loud after decades of silence. The cancer was gone. The infections healed. The scars remained, but they were no longer hidden. Catherine and Thomas Morrison were both cancer-free, both finally home, both warriors, both survivors. And for the first time in 55 years, both, finally, truly free. Catherine Morrison ignored a small mole on her face for 8 months. It nearly killed her. But her story isn't really about cancer. It's about something far more dangerous, the silence we carry. For 46 years, Tom couldn't say "I love you" out loud. For 30 years, Kate healed veterans poisoned by war, never knowing she was being poisoned too. They both believed that strength meant suffering alone, that asking for help was weakness, that hiding pain was noble. That silence almost destroyed them. But when Kate finally stood before her church, her face scarred and changed forever, and spoke the truth, everything shifted. The veterans cried. The community rallied. Lives were saved because someone finally broke the silence. Here's what Catherine and Tom learned. Your scars aren't shameful. They're proof you survived. The words you're afraid to say, "I'm scared," "I need help," "I love you," those are the words that save lives, yours and others. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop carrying everything alone. So here's my question. What have you been carrying in silence? What words have you been afraid to say? Drop a comment below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's break the silence together.